I've learned that there's a tradition here at Living Christ that every year in October there's an emphasis on stewardship, and in particular the financial aspects of stewardship. And I've also learned that on the first Sunday of October, the pastor always kicks that off with a short message about his thoughts on the subject. And since I'm filling in for Pastor Kirk today, then that means I'm it today. But I never hesitate to talk about finances and the financial aspect of stewardship, because it's really a topic that you find throughout the Bible, and what is the proper place of money in our lives. And that's certainly a topic that Jesus had a lot to say about. And so our theme for this year is, as you can see, is building a culture of generosity. And I was asked to speak on two things today. One, where did I first learn about generosity? And then number two, by whom did I learn, or is there a particular person that helped me to learn about generosity? So the first part, where did I first learn about generosity? Have to go back a long way for that one to give you a little background. And I didn't grow up going to any church. I didn't grow up in a religious family, and so it was in college that I was first, I guess you'd say, introduced to Jesus and the Christian faith. And that was at a time in life when I was trying to make sense of the world and trying to make sense of my life. And this message about this person Jesus and this other way of living as a Christian was very appealing to me. And I found that quite interesting. And I wanted to learn more about it. It was very compelling to me. And so I graduated from college at age 22, and I moved back to my hometown of Walla Walla, Washington. And as I said, I wanted to continue to learn about the Christian faith and this fellow Jesus. What was he about? And so I knew I needed to find a church home. And so I tried different churches and eventually landed at Christ Lutheran Church there in Walla Walla. And I started going there probably early fall. And in October, guess what? They had a stewardship emphasis. And it was all new to me, and it was kind of confusing, and I knew it had something to do with money and giving money to the work of the church and to the work of Christ in the world, but I didn't know what that meant or how you even went about that whole process. And so I made an appointment and went and talked to the pastor about it, and I didn't have a clue what's this about. I said, is somebody going to tell me how much I'm supposed to give, or how does this work? And he assured me that nobody was going to tell me how much I had to give. But then he proceeded to talk to me about the biblical guideline for giving, which is the tithe. And a tithe simply means 10 or 10%. And he talked about how the biblical understanding is that everything we have and are, it comes to us from God, 100%. And so a tithe is simply giving back 10% of one's income back to the church and to the work of Christ as an act of worship, as an act of gratitude, of thanksgiving for the ways that God has blessed a person. And that made a lot of sense to me, that everything we have comes to us from God, because at that time I was involved in farming and ranching, and we raised wheat and cattle and alfalfa. And when you're a farmer, you're very connected to the soil and to the seasons, and you realize how dependent we are on God for all that is needed in farming and producing food, right? The soil and the seed and the rain and the sunshine and the seasons all comes from God. And so that made a lot of sense to me to think, okay, yeah, I can see how all that I have ultimately does come from God. And so I decided then at that time, I was 22, a few years ago, 40-some, I thought, this makes sense, I'm going to go ahead and tithe. and been doing that ever since. And it's something that's been very meaningful to me. And then when Susan and I met and got married, fortunately she was very willing to continue that as a married couple, that we would made that agreement that we would continue to tithe of our income and even to move beyond that. And I have to say that's been a source of really a lot of joy in our marriage and our family. And there is a lot of joy in generosity, and we've experienced the joy that comes with generosity. And that starts with God's extravagance and how extravagant God is in giving to us. And so there's a lot of joy in giving back in a thankful response to God. And I've found over the years that the most joyful people I know are also the most generous, and the most stingy people I know are the most unhappy people I know. I think there's a connection there. And if you think about it, what's the root word of the word miserable? Miser. Right? And, I think the most joyful people I know are the most generous, and some of the most unhappy people are the most stingy. And, that's the opposite of what our culture teaches us, though, isn't it? Our culture says if you're unhappy, you should be more stingy. You should get more for yourself. You should be more, you got to get more things for yourself. But it doesn't work that way, because that's not the way God designed the world or human life. But God, who is a generous God, designed us so that when we are generous, we experience joy in that, the joy of generosity. So then I think the other question was, is there someone in particular that I learned generosity from? And one person that came to mind very quickly is a woman named Sylvia. And Sylvia was a part of the congregation that I served, my very first call that I had. This was out in eastern Oregon, in Ontario, Oregon, at St. Paul Lutheran Church. Sylvia had been a long time member there, very faithful, and just a joyous person. It's just a joy to be around. Joy is infectious, isn't it? And she's one of those people you just wanted to be around, just a warm, joyful person. And as I said, that was my first call that I served out of seminary. I was called to serve there. And that congregation had a lot of things that it was struggling with. One in particular was finances, and they had a very large debt that was really crippling their ability to do ministry and to reach out into the community in a more vibrant way. And so it was decided to have a capital campaign that would be over a 3-year period, and all the money given to that would go to paying off this debt so that they could reach out into the community. And one of the people that was very excited about that was Sylvia. And she was very excited to think that the congregation could move ahead and be a more vibrant ministry into the community. And so she was asked to serve on the leadership team for that effort. And as part of that, we had a small leadership team that we would meet and plan. And one of the parts of that was that the people on the leadership team were asked to share how much they were going to give over this 3-year period as a way to encourage and inspire each other. And so Sylvia shared that, and she was at retirement age at that time. She was planning to retire that year. And she lived on a very modest income. She worked at the local newspaper there in town, and so you can imagine income quite modest. And she had been a few years earlier that her husband had left her, and so she had to support herself. And then she had adult children who were struggling in various ways, and she was continuing to help provide for them financially. So she knew that if she retired on her retirement income, she wouldn't have anything left to give to this project at the church, and she really wanted to. And so Sylvia shared that she had decided that she would, instead of retiring, she would continue to work for 3 more years, and that the money that she made over and above her living expenses, that is what she would then give to this project for the church. And I thought, just really, that's been over 30 years ago, and I can still remember it so clearly because it so touched and inspired me and taught me about generosity. And it really inspired the congregation because later she was asked to share that story with the congregation. And I think about what an act of generosity and what a sacrifice on her part. And yet she did it so joyfully and so willingly. And it totally inspired the congregation for each of us to think about our own generosity. And out of that campaign was very successful, and the congregation was able to go on and expand their ministries and have continued to be a vibrant ministry even to today. And I would say that vibrant ministry there could be traced all the way back, in particular to one person, Sylvia, who inspired us with her sacrifice and her generosity. So for me, generosity it's about joy and the joy of generosity. And that all starts with God's generosity, because I understand that all that I have and all that I am is a gift to me from God. And so I think about my favorite psalm, Psalm 107, and the psalm says, "O give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, and his loving kindness endures forever." Amen. Amen.